So we are continuing. Um, is it, as far as overcharging for a piece of real estate? That's really what we were talking about yesterday. Our rabbis tell us that there's no such din of overcharging when it comes to carcos, when it comes to real estate. So that's where we were up to yesterday. Even though we've established that it's a form of theft to overcharge an unsuspecting purchaser or to underpay an unsuspecting seller, that's only when it comes to metaltalin, only when it comes to chattel. But there's no such thing as over or under with karka, with real estate. So he says, V'chol zeh b'metaltalin. That's where we were up to yesterday. Aval bekarka ein dino na. Kamosha haGemara darsha, as the Gemara had said, V'chi timkaru mimkar la'amitecha, o kano miyad amitecha, lo tanu ish et achiv. Because the Torah uses the terminology of when you sell to your fellow or purchase from the hand of your fellow. Now that word miyad is really unnecessary. Why does the Torah use the extra word miyad? Dedavka davar shenikna v'nimsar miyad liyad. It implies that only things which are passed from hand to hand. So I can sell you a widget. I can sell you, an item of food. I can sell you a box of tissues, right? All of those things are things that are movable and I can give you from hand to hand. But he says, "V'kevin shahakarkos lo nimsaros miyad liyad ein bahen duno na." What the Torah is conveying is that real estate is excluded from that law of ona'ah. V'hu hadin b'schiras karka shlo shaykh bo ona'ah kamo b'mechiras karka. And the same thing is if you're renting property, you're leasing out property, there's no law of overcharging, just like there's no law of overcharging when it comes to the sale of property. And that's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. The Haramban beperushola Torah kasav, shemasha haTorah miyata, she'ein ona'a lekarkos. So the Ramban, in his Torah commentary, adds something very interesting. Now, normally the Ramban's Torah commentary is a non-halachic source, but he says we're going to bring it in anyway. He says the fact that the Torah excludes real estate from this law of hona'ah, hainu she'ein bo chiyuv lahachzir es hakesef shel ha'ona'ah, ach af al pikein yesh bahem iser ona'ah. Fascinating. He says, yes, it's true. The laws of ona'ah do not apply to real estate, but that doesn't make it any less usser when you know that you're exploiting an unsuspecting customer. So even if you may not be you can't be obligated to return the overcharge, but if you know that the property is overvaluated, or you know that, let's say, there's something, well, in cases where there's something hidden about the property, that's not ona'ah anymore. That's actual fraud. In other words, let's say the property, as it appears, would be valuated at $1 million, but they don't know that there's a cracked foundation and that there's a lot of problems with the pipes in the house and so forth and so on. So that would actually be fraud to represent it as being not damaged when it's damaged. Okay, so, but he says, the rule is that when you rip off someone in real estate deals, you can't. That's not actionable in Beis Din, but it's still going to be an isser of onah. V'chein das Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah says the same thing. Aval hapnei Yehoshua kasav shahakarkos nismatu gam mehalav shelo sonu ela sheletchatchila asra haTorah lahonos bahem. The Pnei Yehoshua is not as strict. He says real estate was completely excluded from the prohibition of onah, but lechatchila, you're still not allowed to do it. But b'di'evid, once you've did it, it's a valid sale. V'hasma kosav she'afal pi she'ein bahem ona'as mamon, mikol makom over ba'ona'asam al iser ona'as devarim. And the Sma adds an interesting facet to this. We have the Torah says two times in the Torah, "V'lo tonu isha sachiv," do not oppress, or I guess what's the word? Exploit. That's the word that we used yesterday. Do not exploit your fellow. And the word ona, lotonu, means two things. It means onaas mamon, and it means onaas devarim, because it's written twice in the Torah. One is for the prohibition of ripping someone off, and the other one is the prohibition of assaulting them verbally by insulting them, calling them names, saying things that you know are going to hurt their feelings. Okay, so that's onaas devarim. He says, Mikol makom over ba'onaasam al yisr onaas devarim. De logora onaas karka me onaas devarim. He says, because there's no less of a prohibition of onaa when it comes to um, uh, oppressing someone verbally than oppressing someone financially. So if oppressing someone financially is verbally is prohibited, if I sell you a piece of property for more than it's worth, I may not be technically liable for onaas mamon, but I'll still be liable for onaas devarim for having communicated to you the sale price that is well above what is fair market value. V'chein kasav ha'or chachayim hakadosh V'yesh bo lav shel onaas devarim kevin shgarim lo tsar v'agmas met nefesh shemocher lo biyoser yakar. And the Or HaChaim writes it, and he says as follows. He says, what's the prohibition based on? Causing someone anguish either through your words or through ripping them off and making them feel like they've been taken advantage of. So if I'm in violation when I've caused someone anguish just because I've said something painful, then surely if I've ripped them off and sold them a piece of property for much higher than it's really worth, that's also onah. It may not be actionable, but it's still onah nonetheless. The Hezber Hadvarim She'ein Onaa Lekarkos Kosav Harashba. He says, so why is it that the Torah excludes real estate from the technical law of onah that's actionable and based in? So he says, the Rashba explains, Mishum Sheyesh Anashim Shemachshivim Karka Yoter Mikol Kesef Umuchanim L'Shalem Ala Karka Yoter Mishavya. He says, simply because real estate is a very subjective marketplace. There are some people who will pay more for what a property is worth based on desirability of location, based on sentimentality. And so therefore, because there are people who are prepared to pay more for real estate than what it's worth, you can't really say that a person charged more because perhaps there would be another buyer out there that would be prepared. In other words, it's not like certain commodities, like I mentioned, like soybeans and other commodities that have a fixed market price. When there are items that have that are subjective to the eyes of the beholder, there the Torah is not as strict as making onah actionable. Uchein ze hizbir b'sefer hachinuch shekevin shekarka ze davar ha'omed la'olam derech habrios limchol la'achar shekanu oso afal pisha hayabona. Sefer Hachinuch writes a similar idea. Real estate is something that you have permanently. It's not a consumable item like many metaltalin. Most objects that are chattel have a limited shelf life. Whereas even if I buy a cow, it's eventually going to die. If I buy a car, it's eventually going to break down. So there, people care. They want to make sure that they're paying a fair market value, especially when it's something that they're not going to keep forever. Want to make sure they're not going to get ripped off. But real estate, the Sefer Hachinuch writes, is something that a person says, well, all right, I paid an extra 10% or 20% over what I was supposed to pay, but you know what? I keep it forever. So over the course of my lifetime, I guess I could amortize the overpay into, so it's not such a terrible thing. So people tend to be moichel when they get ripped off on real estate more than they would for movable items. אבל התוספos בבבא basra כתבו שלא זה הטעם אלא שכך ציווה הקדוש ברוך הוא וזה גזירס הטוב. Tosfos says it's just the gzeras hakassav, that God, for reasons that are known only to him, made this distinction between chattel and real estate. But that's how he concludes the tshuva, which is an interesting way to conclude a tshuva. So that's why the footnote says, I guess he sort of finishes the idea, al kol panim ladas kol haposkim shehuvu lamalo. So based on everything that we've just seen, yesh iser ona lahonos afilu bikarkos. There is a prohibition of overcharging someone. It's just not actionable. So, in other words, once it's done, it's done. Amnam ein b'minchas chinachu ve'evan ha'azel shediktiku meharambam shebikarkos ein iser ona klal. These commentaries point out that based on their understanding of the Rambam, there's no prohibition whatsoever. And that seems to be the pshat in Rashi, as the Chikrei Lev points out. He writes, Davar hanikna miyad leyad, his love b'valton, that only something that's transferred from hand to hand is there a prohibition of ona. Mashma midvar v'debikarkos afilu isur aleka. And I refer you to the Rashash commentary on Rashi, which we're not going to go into now. It's too in depth and it doesn't have any ramification. But Rav Sharaga's psak is that you're not allowed to rip someone off, even if you feel that you can exploit them based on their ignorance. You're not allowed to do that. You know. That's right. That's actual fraud. And that is actionable, by the way. In other words, if I sell you, whether it's real estate or chattel, and I misrepresent the product so that I cover over the flaws of the product, then then you can take me to Beis Din and sue me under all circumstances.
But how does it work then? I have something for sale that somebody perceives maybe what it is, and they agree to an amount of money to buy it. Like the buyer has an idea of how much they want to spend on it. So if that's within their realm of decision, if I take that money, if I misrepresent it, or if I charge them extra.
No, well, I think that there's only misrepresentation if you represent it as the proper value. In other words, if you know that someone is so first of all, let's talk about, we've talked about the laws of Ona extensively, but let's say there are two different kinds of sales. Let's say if I buy something on Amazon, for example, I'll pay much less than by going into a retail boutique. Or let's say, I go down to Niagara Falls. I don't know if you've ever bought stuff in Niagara. You go down there and it's like everything is 50 or 100% more expensive than everywhere else because it's a tourist trap, right? So that's not considered ona'ah because part of the business model of going to a store like that is that you're paying for the experience as much as you're paying for the product that they're selling. And so it's understood that they're going to be charging a premium when you're in an entertainment center like that. But even if, let's say, I run a retail store, I think when the last time we learned about Ona, I gave the example of Tiffany's on Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills, which is, I grew up just a few blocks from there. So even though I've never been inside a Tiffany's in my life, but I can tell you that you're paying not just for the piece of jewelry that you're going to be purchasing, but you're paying for their rent that they have to pay for. In other words, they have overhead costs in keeping their stores open that are built into the price of the item. Could you purchase it for much less if you went, let's say, if you went to Turkey, to Istanbul, let's say, and assuming that it's not a counterfeit, But if you went there and they were able to get it for much, much less money, yes. But again, it's all based on the actual cost of the retailer's expenses are built into the price. So
But also, sorry,
yeah,
but
yes,
Tiffany's
yes,
isn't that you're paying for the name as well, like perfume, for example. I mean,
yes,
you're
you're
paying
paying, yeah,
exorbitant prices.
yeah, you're paying for the name as well, right? So exactly, if it's a Gucci bag or whatever, yeah, so that's what you're paying for that as well. Um, but there are certain commodities that have fair, there you can say fair market value, like a car, for example. There's a blue book that tells you the value of the car. Do they have blue book here in Canada? Yeah, right.
Also,
Lots of variables.
There are variables, and but so within those variables, a person is entitled to charge the price that is within those variables. Once you go wildly outside those variables, and you misrepresent that you're charging a fair price, so then that's where it becomes more problematic. Um, there are certain, like I said, certain items that there's um, values that are placed on it. Like I can tell you, I have a comic book collection. Okay, so a comic book collection today is very the marketplace is very sophisticated. There are websites that will show you exactly for what condition each old comic book is worth, based on the very carefully graded system of what the right the condition, whether it's the highest would be like 9.8, the lowest would be a 1.7, and they go, it's like a decimal system, you know. Um, and then you get to see based on what the marketplace has sustained up until now, you can see recent sales. So what I would, but what about the fact that, grandma is selling stuff in her attic, that she doesn't know the value of? So if I were to go to her and say, I'm going to pay you fair value. I offer her for her Action Comics #1, which is worth several millions of dollars. And I tell her, well, it's just a rag. I'll give you $100 for it. Take it off your hands. Then I turn around and I make $1 million on it. So that's ona. That's a classic case of ona, right? But what if I tell Granny, I say, if you got these graded, you get a lot of money for it, you know. So do you want to do it? She says, no, I don't want it. I don't care about the money. But I tell her, it's really worth a lot of money, these things. She says, no, just take it off my hands. I don't care about it. Then you've given her full disclosure and you've fulfilled your obligation. Okay. It's very tempting sometimes when you know that something is very valuable and you want to, but then you feel bad afterwards because you've taken advantage of someone's ignorance. Okay. All right. So so with real estate, the same thing would be true. Um, Another example would be, let's say you're selling a piece of real estate. The buyer is completely unaware that they're going to be building a huge something or other that's going to completely devalue the neighborhood. Let's say, you know, um, they're going to be building a prison right next door, or they're going to be building a drug rehab center right next door. Okay. And you know that no one's going to want to touch this house because it's going to be right next to the drug rehab or the prison, right? So then you're actually committing ona'ah, at least according to the commentaries that Rav Sharaga has brought in. Okay, so you got to be able to learn to live with that. If the only difference between karka and chattel is that chattel is actionable and based in, karka is not. I could say to you, with karka, you should have done your due diligence. That's where I can say you should have checked it out for yourself. But you still have to live with yourself your conscience, because you know that the Torah told you not to do that, not to exploit someone's ignorance. Okay, next, Siman Nun Gimel. Ha'imutter l'moicher lahavi schora acheres isma shehizmin hakona. Okay, giving a customer different item from what he ordered. Okay, so when it comes to replacement goods, you know how sometimes when you order something online, it says we reserve the right to replace it with something similar, or like what's the language they use? A substitute item or something. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, is it really? Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. That's right. Okay. They do that a lot with, I think, car salesmen as well. Yeah. So, ani socher b'sifrei Torah tefillin u'mezuzahs. I am a dealer in stam, in sifrei Torah, tefillin, and mezuzahs. V'yesh anashim shemazminim u'madgishim sherotzim davka mezuzot shel sofer ploni. So there are people who purchase items from me, but they say, I specifically want that sofer. In other words, let's say there's a sofer named Bernstein, who's got a very distinctive style of writing, and it's very attractive to some people. So a guy comes to me and says, I only want Bernstein Sifrei Torah. I only want Bernstein mezuzahs. B'lifamim ein li b'melai. And sometimes I don't have Bernstein material in stock. Ha'im muter latet lahem mezuzot shel sofer acher shehem yoter mehudarot. Am I allowed to substitute Bernstein merchandise with other Sofrim's merchandise that is more valuable? So am I allowed to substitute it with something that's of a higher value, like you were saying, Errol? So that's the question. So Kosov Morin b'Shulchan Aruch. And obviously this would have other applications than just Judaica, right? It would be true. What would be another example? If Moish was here, he'd be able to rattle off a bunch of different examples of the types of merchandise that he sells. I sell MP3 players. Do people even use MP3 players anymore? No, no, they don't, right? Just have phones, right?
Yeah, my grandson just got one.
Oh, he did get an MP3?
Yeah, they have loaded with Jewish things.
Oh, the ones that are loaded with Jewish music because phones are usser, I guess, right? Okay. So yeah. So I sell TVs, flat screen TVs, and actually all TVs are flat screen. It's like the technology is so moving so quickly. What? Yeah. So I sell TVs, and the buyer just wants Samsung. That's it. That's the brand that he wants. But I'm at a Samsung, but I have LG, which is sometimes arguably an even better brand than Samsung. So it's the MSRP on an LG TV is higher than on a Samsung. So am I allowed to replace it when he takes delivery? He ends up getting the LG TVs, right? It's the same question, right? Bernstein mezuzahs, LG TVs, okay? Kasaf Moran b'Shulchan Aruch, lahavdil elef avdalas. Hamocher lechavero min mimine peros, v'nosan lo min acher, ein kan mecher, u'shneim yicholim lachzor bahem. So the classic case in the Shulchan Aruch is if a person sells a certain type of produce. And when we say produce, many times we're talking about grain, because grain was the most commonly exchanged commodity, consumable commodity. It probably still is even today. They have the soybean market and the wheat market and the barley market, pork bellies. There's all different kinds of market commodities, right? If the customer says he wants to buy one type of produce and I substitute it with another type of produce, the sale is null and void. Either party is allowed to nullify the sale and demand a return. So Ketzad, Mocher lo chitin levanos v'nimtzu adumos v'chule. If let's say a guy ordered white wheat and the seller gave him red wheat, so there's different species of wheat. They probably have special names today, right? So any wheat merchants here? So because of Hasma Sham, afilu im hamin hasheni hu adif uviyoker yoter mehamin shehitna imo bishas mechira. This is true, says the Sma, even if the red wheat is more valuable at the time of the sale than the white wheat. So the guy thought he was doing him a favor because he ran out of white wheat, so I'll give him the more expensive commodity. Afilu hachi gam halokuach halokeach, I think, yachol lachzerbo. Purchaser can demand a nullification of the sale. Kevin shaloze mashehitna ito, because that's not what he negotiated for. Che'ein ze matzinu hamakadesh esa isha almanas shehu ani v'nimtza asher ena mikudeshes. So he says the same thing is true. Let's say a man presents a woman with a ring and he says, you are here by my wife on the condition that I am a poor man. In other words, he represents himself as a poor man. And it's on that basis that she accepts the kiddush. And then it turns out that he's loaded. Okay? So in that situation, you would say, well, why shouldn't she be married? Isn't that like an added bonus? And the answer is, as you and I both know, no. Sometimes the wealth is a liability. And Kevin shemakbid al tanai mesuyam ein l'shanot midato. And the answer is no. She's not married. It's not a legal marriage because it was made under false pretenses. It was not based on the conditions of the sale. The condition of the transaction. Oh, sorry, we're going to have to stop here. Okay, well, we'll continue. Unfortunately, Rabbi Isai, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I apologize. So we'll have to resume this Tuesday. The family day is Monday. So we will resume this shir on Tuesday. Wishing you a fantastic Shabbos. See you in a few days. Take care.
Shabbos. Thank you.